Go over a little bit of CJCJ. As you can hear, recording is in progress. Maybe you did or didn't hear that. But we're going to go over a little bit of what CJCJ as an org. We're going to introduce ourselves to you as the speakers, and then we'll get into a brief history of why we're here and some of the headlines and fake news that brought us to this report today. We'll go over some of the findings with the report's author, and then we'll also have time for discussing why these findings matter and wrapping it up with questions and answers and next steps if there is something that you would like to do in that direction. And then if you still have any questions at all after this webinar, please feel free to contact us via our website or via social media. So a little bit about CJCJ. The Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization whose mission is to reduce society's reliance on incarceration as a solution to social problems. In pursuit of this mission, CJCJ provides direct community services, policy research and reporting, as well as public education resources. Our work promotes balanced and humane criminal justice system designed to reduce incarceration and enhance long-term public safety for all. And as for our direct services to the community, we provide those in San Francisco itself for folks in different dealings with the incarceration and criminal justice system, ranging from reentry to diversion and all ages. If you have any questions, please feel free to check out our website for more information on our programs, services, and also public education resources. So we'll go ahead and tell you who you're going to hear from today. Starting with me, I've already spoke a lot, but I will give a formal introduction to you all. My name is Tina Marie Curiel Vega. I am the daughter of Gonzalo Juan Curiel and Eleanor Cecilia Curiel Vega. I am formerly incarcerated and system impacted. I am Chicana and Boricua, and I also have the distinct pleasure and privilege of being the communications and policy analyst here at CJCJ. Another little thing in our intros that we'll share is a false narrative that we have heard surrounding crime. And one that I have heard recently is that crime and or punishment through, to treat crime with punishment or incarceration is what's going to keep us safe. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Mike Males, to introduce himself. And if you don't mind sharing a false narrative that you've heard around crime recently, Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Males, and I'm sorry my hair's flipping up. We have a fan on today because it's a hot room here in Auburn, California. I am a senior researcher for the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice, and I used to teach sociology at the University of California, and I really enjoy working for CJCJ and all the innovative stuff that we've been coming up with. And one of the myths of crime that I've heard about is this continual news media narrative that they can't seem to get away from, that crime is always up and crime is always worse than it's ever has been. And no matter how much they know that's a false narrative, they can't seem to get away from it. So that's something we want to challenge today.
Thank you, Mike. I'll pass it on to Gracia.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gracia, pronouns she, her, hers. I am a mother, scholar, and policy expert with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. And one false narrative that I constantly hear, I live in the Bay Area and our office, CJCJ, is in San Francisco. A false narrative I constantly hear is that, for instance, the BART is unsafe or that you cannot park anywhere in the Bay Area without getting your windows smashed in. That's just not the case. I love taking BART to San Francisco, and I honestly can't wait till they expand it farther so it's just easier to travel. Traffic has really impacted people's way to go to different places, so I love BART. I'm a big fan of it, and I'll pass it back to you, Tina.
Thank you, Gracia. Okay, so now you know who we are, and we're going to go ahead and kind of set the stage for our report and looking back at some California history of what brought us here. And we're going to start with the California's prison overcrowding. We know that mass incarceration resulted in overcrowdings in prisons, especially in California, and that overwhelmingly affected people of color, and that in this situation, eventually a lawsuit was filed on behalf of incarcerated individuals that were inside of California state prisons at the time of this severe overcrowding. This overcrowding was killing one person per week, and prison populations were at double their capacity. The lawsuits that came from folks that were inside of these facilities eventually resulted in a Supreme Court ruling that the overcrowding and lack of appropriate mental and physical care for those being incarcerated in California in the prison system violated their constitutional rights. So they ruled that California had to reduce its prison population and end the inhumane overcrowding, which would also save lives.
I'm sorry.
So
So
from that,
can I, there's a black banner that's crowding the titles at the top.
oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Thank you. Is it gone?
No, now it's on the other side.
I don't see it. I don't see it.
It's like it's just blocking half the title. I don't know if Mike, you could see it, or Nancy, yeah.
Yes, I can see it.
I'm not really sure how to change that unless you
Try
want me
to,
to like
Stop
stop share
sharing.
and have you share.
I could do that. Let me pull it up.
Thank you for bearing with us, y'all. We want to be able to have that showing appropriately. So just to like refresh us, we're at prison overcrowding. And from that, from the overcrowding, is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Can you go to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. And so then from that came a period of California history that can be termed like the reform era. And we got critical justice reforms that addressed this deadly overcrowding crisis. And I'm going to stress that these are a good thing, that people were dying and that prisons were not helping people. And we know that mass incarceration was happening. So this was something that was necessary in California. So in 2011, we got something called Public Safety Realignment Act, which sometimes is also called AB 109. And what that did was move people with nonviolent, non-sexual, and non-serious offenses from state prison or parole into county jails or probation. And allowed them to serve their time locally and have local supervision and resources that also followed them to have the chance to rehabilitate within the community. I can also say that I myself managed some of that funding in Stockton, California for a few years in 2019. And it was very rewarding to see what those opportunities did in changing people's lives. And we were also mindful that it was saving people's lives by getting people out of that overcrowded prisons. From there, we also have Prop 47 in 2014, and this changed some low-level drug and property crimes from potential felonies into misdemeanors, which put prison savings back into community services. And that was also a good thing. So these are what are considered like the reform era or the reform when people talk about reform era and like what reform has done, these are what they're largely talking about and what was built up to them. Can you change the slide? Thank you. And now, not too many years later, we're starting to see false narratives that are very dangerous. About a decade later, we're seeing campaigns that are blatantly distorting crime statistics, using outright lies. We have right here, we won't spend too much time on him, but we have a Riverside County Sheriff named Chad Bianco, who in his words was saying that crime in California was steadily on the rise and out of control, and that our California public safety policy is one of the worst in the nation, which we know is blatantly false. Will you go ahead to the next slide? These are other false narratives that we've seen. We've seen a lot of headlines. We could have filled this, but we don't want to make it look too busy. With California crime is out of control. Drug addiction is through the roof. And it's due to this liberal agenda, due to this reform, and that this was the plan the entire time. And then to quote Donald Trump, our crime rate is going through the roof. So these are setting the stage for some of the things that we were seeing, and used our intentions as CJCJ and are researching and reporting to produce this most recent report with that intention. I'm going to go ahead and be turning it over to the report's author, Mike Males, as we get to the next slide. And I will allow Mike to talk to you all about where we got the data from, and then the time period that we used, and then we can just go right into the key findings from there.
Thank you, Tina. As Tina said, I authored the main statistical part of this report. The entire Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice was responsible for the entire report. There was a lot of work put into it by a number of people. And our theme, and this is going to be a series I hope we're launching with this report, Stop Lying About California. And in fact, California's reforms, liberal or just common sense, however you want to look at them, or court mandated. That's another way to look at them. The courts basically told us we had to end prison crowding, but we could still have prisons at 100 and I believe 25% of capacity. So they're still crowded. But in any sense, reforms did not bring more crime. In fact, rates now are at or near record lows in the state. And we got this data from the Open Justice website, mostly from the Open Justice website of the California Department of Justice, which is run by the Attorney General. This is the standard data everybody uses. So it's a little bizarre that we don't hear this, the correct narrative more often. And we hope to show you some trends from the last 30 years, but mainly focusing on the last 10 years of criminal justice reform. So whenever you're ready, we can move on. All right, well, here's the trend. What does this graph show? It shows property offenses reported to law enforcement per 100,000 population for the entire state of California for the 1995-2025 period. That's the last 40 years. And the reason we include the pre-2000 period, even though this was the pre-reform period, is because crime rates were very high prior to 2000. We often forget that or talk about going back to the good old days, where supposedly the police were freer to operate. We locked up a lot more people and so forth. But actually, crime rates were very high back then. If you look at the top line, which is the ACWA line, which is all property crime, these are almost all felonies. And go back to 1995, they were vastly higher back then than they are today. Same thing with theft, which is the dark blue line just below it. And then the three sub kind of crimes that are getting a lot of attention today, the smash and grab auto thefts, the light ACWA line, shoplifting, which is a dark blue line, and residential burglary, which is a light blue line down at the bottom. They have similar rates, so their trends are a little harder to distinguish. But there is a common pattern, and that is that all three are vastly lower than they were 40 years ago. And very interestingly, if you look particularly at the 2005 period, right around there, you see fairly high crime rates. That was California's peak period of imprisonments. Back then, we had 60 to 70,000 people in prison for property and drug offenses, 150 to 170,000 overall, but about 40% of them more were in there for property and drug offenses. And this was the thing, of course, the state decided to do something about after the courts told them we had to do something about prison overcrowding. And so we started a series of reforms beginning around 2010 with public safety realignment. And notice really from this graph that crime did not go up. This is what we're being told today, that these reforms, especially Proposition 47, which took effect in November 2014, that this caused crime to go up. But actually, property crimes continued to go down, thefts continued to go down, smash and grab stayed fairly even. That's a funny kind of crime because it's usually committed by organized rings that go from city to city. Shoplifting has an interesting trend that we'll talk about later, and burglary, non-residential burglary, which is often of commercial establishments, also went down, although it's hard to tell from this graph because the rates are not very high. So generally, the trends during the reform period have been very favorable. There are some exceptions and some nuances. You'll notice in particular from around 2020 to 2022, crime rates, reported crime rates did go up. Well, what caused that? In 2020, the state largely shut down with a large drop in public presence and shopping and so forth due to the COVID pandemic and some state regulations, but also people were cautious about going out. So naturally, we were going to have a rebound. And when people talk about an increase in crime, they almost always are kind of pinpointing that period as if somehow reforms were responsible for it. No, that was the state reopening after the COVID pandemic. And that happened almost everywhere in the country, by the way, that had any kind of COVID policies. So anyway, if you have any questions, we can get to those when appropriate about this particular graph. But I think these pretty well sum up the trends that property crime, and we'll do another report later on violent crime. Property crime is at near or record lows right now. So if we want to move on. All right, these trends are continuing into 2024. We only have reports now for major cities, crime reports, but the graph only went through 2023. But in 2024, we're seeing a continued drop in crime, especially violent crime, well, especially property crime, as a matter of fact. So these are crime rates per 100,000 population for the state's 48 large cities that reported to the FBI. And you can see from 2023 to 2024, crime generally declined. Violent crime was down 2%. Property crime was down 10% for the first quarter of 2024. And we also have a report that just came out a couple of days ago on California's 10 largest jurisdictions, biggest being Los Angeles, and it goes on down to Oakland, Fresno, and so forth. The 10 biggest law enforcement jurisdictions, crime dropped through the first half of 2024. We saw a continued drop in all Part 1 offenses, and especially large drops in homicide, as you see also occurred in other cities for 2024. So the best evidence we have to date is that crime is down pretty dramatically across California, at least by the best measures we have. Yes. Okay.
Wait, were you going to ask if there was any questions? Because I think there was a question from one of the.
Oh yeah, we can take questions immediately. Sure, go ahead.
I just had one that was like, I think they were asking about the graph, so I wanted to pose it, and it was if auto theft is in these, is it included in these?
Yeah, it's the second offense to the far right there. The second offense from the far right, motor vehicle theft. It is up 2%. It's one of the only crimes that is. Robbery went up a little bit. Assault stayed about the same. But motor vehicle theft, that's been bouncing up and down rather radically. And a lot of the reason for that is that, like the smash and grab thefts from vehicles, motor vehicle theft is often a crime committed by organized rings that go from city to city. And so you'll see a very high rate in San Francisco, and then it'll go down, and then you'll see a high rate in Oakland, and then it'll go down, and then you'll see a high rate in Reno, and so forth. Motor vehicle theft bounces around, and people unfortunately make almost anything of these trends that they want to make. Okay, any other questions? If not, we'll just look at a couple other things the report found and covers. First of all, as I mentioned, COVID-19 temporarily brought crime down, but for some artificial reasons. The state was largely shut down by policy, and also people were cautious, wisely so. And so we had an artificial drop in crime in 2020, and then an increase afterwards. There's nothing to do with policy. Second thing that is interesting to note here is that the FBI has is adopting and phasing in a new form of crime reporting, which includes lesser offenses. So it used to be that if you committed an armed robbery and then you left the store after robbing it, and you happened to see a purse sitting on the front seat of a vehicle, and so you reached the vehicle and took the purse, which is normally a misdemeanor, then when it was reported by police, only the robbery, the most serious offense, would be reported. That's the old system. Under the new system, they would now also report the misdemeanor theft from the vehicle. So you would have two crimes reported for one incident. And so that can make crime appear to go up, especially for lesser offenses that weren't previously reported. Finally, we are seeing, in terms of things that affect crime, we're seeing changes in reporting enthusiasm. That's a very tricky area because it's hard to measure. But we're seeing, for instance, a real concentration, and we've seen this especially in Sacramento and some other areas where law enforcement is leaning on these big stores like Target and to report more shopliftings and thefts, and in a sense blaming them for the fact that law enforcement's not able to respond to these. So crime reports can also be affected by differences in concentration in reporting by various agencies. And we see that, occurring especially with shoplifting right now because it's such a highly publicized crime. Okay, were there any questions? Okay. On issues that affect crime reporting.
We've got a whole bunch of great questions that we're going to be getting to soon. Super excited for that, Mike. But I think for now, we'll probably just kind of keep it going. So if you're done with this slide, we can turn it over to Chris. Yeah.
Next slide. Okay. Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you, Mike. And why does this matter, right? These narratives have real life consequences. They impact people we love, they impact our communities, and they impact policies that then in turn continues to impact the people we love and our communities. A perfect example of this is Prop 36, which is going to be on the ballot in November. Now, it's been advertised that Prop 36 is the antithesis of Prop 47 and that it's just going to undo Prop 47. What's important to note is that while it does create more serious offenses for people using substances, it doesn't completely do away with Prop 47. So you can be against Prop 47, but you should understand that Prop 36 is going to take money away from mental health services. It is going to take money away from K through 12. It is going to take money away from diversion programs and recovery programs. But the narrative and the fear mongering, they are really tapping into that to tap into people in order to promote Prop 36, which is backed by big organizations such as like Walmart and Target. And so these are real life consequences. And so you can be against Prop 47, but you should also understand that Prop 36 is not the solution. Like we can disagree on the best methods, right, to make sure our communities are safe. But there's just an example of how the narrative has really fueled people into believing Prop 36 is going to change these things when I don't think anybody wants to see money taken away from K through 12 schools, when we already have teachers using their own salary for school supplies because the budget is already that low. So that's just an example of how dangerous these false narratives can seep into policies that impact everyone around us.
Thank you, Christian. And then I believe now we're going to go into our question and answer. We have been talking about this for about a week. So we asked people, this is a new thing for us, webinars. We're hoping to do it for our reports more often as releases this way. And engage with you all in different ways that we can. So we asked folks to send us the questions ahead of time if they had any. We have amazing questions that you all have been putting in the chat to us as well. I'm very impressed by them, and I didn't think of a lot of them. So shout out to y'all. I like your brains. And we did get some questions. We got some via email. We got some that somebody sent us in as a video. So what you send us, we look at. And so we're going to answer a few of the ones that we got first, and then we'll go into the ones that are in the chat. So the first question that we got was from Carolina Goodman, the chair of the Committee on Criminal Justice Reform for the League of Women Voters of Greater Los Angeles. And she asked, the beginning of her message actually said she was disappointed not to see just Los Angeles data. So she asked if we could share Los Angeles data either from the county or the city for the same time period. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Mike, for an answer of what you see on these charts. And thank you for your question, Carolina. I hope that this answer is helpful to you.
Well, yeah, thank you, because Los Angeles is like taking a magnifying glass and putting it up to California. Its trends always have to be exaggerated in terms of higher crime rates for the most part. I'm talking about the city of Los Angeles, and also starker trends. So you see, if you can mentally remember the first graph, California, Los Angeles city crime rates are much higher for most offenses than for the rest of the state. It's a big city, and they're going to have higher crime rates. And also its trends are much more downwards. So you see the Aqua line at the top, and again, starting around 1990 and going to 2023, you see a sharp drop in property crime, the top Aqua line, and also a sharp drop in theft. And then below that, the three subcrimes, the smash and grab thefts, the shoplifting, and the very bottom one is commercial burglaries or non-residential burglaries. And notice also, again, because it's Los Angeles, it has to have a bigger increase after the COVID pandemic. It goes to a lower low and then has a bigger increase afterwards. Los Angeles may have had more effective shutdown policies, and that explains why its rebound is a little bit more. But in any case, this again is not due to policy. It's due largely to some circumstances of a pandemic, surrounding a pandemic. So those are Los Angeles City crime trends. And if you look at the right-hand graph, you see the Los Angeles Sheriff's crime trends. And this is really, when you look at graphs like this, always look at the left-hand bar on each side, because you need to appreciate how different the crime rates are in the rural parts of Los Angeles County that are generally covered by the sheriff. They're designated to cover the unincorporated areas of LA County, which are still pretty big, over 1 million people. But they're going to have a little bit lower crime rates. Also, because they're rural and spread out, crimes are harder to solve and harder to police there. But we see very similar trends. And by the way, LA City and LA Sheriff, you can't add those two together and get the county, because there's also obviously a lot of other jurisdictions in the county, like Long Beach and Pasadena and so forth. So anyway, you see the same trends in general. You see the drop from the 1990s, you see a continued drop during the reform era, and then you see an increase during the COVID reopening after the COVID pandemic in property crimes, thefts, a little bit of a decline in smash and grab, which is kind of interesting because cities have very different rates of smash and grab theft from vehicles. And again, I think that depends on whether there's an organized ring that's in your particular city. And then some slight increases for shoplifting and commercial burglary. So these are pretty much the same trends, regardless of the fact that these are very different areas that are being looked at. So anyway, yeah, we wanted to put up some graphs about Los Angeles because LA is always interesting to look at.
Thank you, Mike. And before we go on to the next question, the next one is going to be from Ben Amador from Stockton. And we were fortunate enough to have him send us a question in, which we encourage you all to do in any form that you would like. So it's just going to start when we go on to the next one. So thank you, Ben. And he is a Northern California organizer for Time Done in Stockton, California.
Hello, everyone. My question is this. Using provable facts and empirical data from credible sources, how can we best counter the claim that reporting is down, but crime is actually up?
Well, that's an excellent question. And in fact, it gets to the heart of how people could say almost anything they want to about crime. How do we know what crime is really doing? Reported crime, only a certain percentage, maybe half of violent crimes are reported to police. So there's the other half that are not. Property crimes, even fewer are reported to police. So the police reports that we're forced to rely on, because that's the only source of comprehensive data over time and by jurisdiction, does not include most crimes that actually occur. So we have two ways of looking at that. One is the only crime we can really verify is homicide, because homicide is also tabulated by public health agencies and vital statistics, and that is definitely down. So the first thing is the most serious and frightening crime, or among the most serious and frightening, homicide is definitely down in California, and down very sharply in recent years. The second thing is the National Crime Victimization Survey actually surveys people age 12 and older, so it doesn't capture crimes against children, but it surveys them every year. But the most recent one is 2022, and it does show very similar trends to the reported crimes reported to law enforcement. And the National Crime Victimization Survey also shows a big decline since the early 90s, when it first started, in both property and violent crimes, just like FBI reports do. And then when you get to the COVID pandemic, you see the increase in crimes that are reported to the victimization survey as the society opened back up. So the answer to your question is, you obviously can't tell somebody, and this is what the news media does. They will go to somebody who was just victimized by a crime, like In-N-Out being shut down in Oakland, and act like this never happened before. And of course it did. But you really can't. You really just have to have a lot of sympathy for people who are victims of crime. I've been a victim myself, and I understand how people feel when it's just happened to them. But we tend to find from studies that people get their impression of what most people get their impression of crime not from personal experience, but from how the media is playing it. And during periods where the media is responding to interest groups that want to depict crime as going up, then people are going to think crime is going up no matter what it's actually doing. And it's hard to counter because we don't have an accurate measure of what crime is really doing. All we have is a bunch of measures that have their own particular flaws, but they all show pretty much the same thing. Whether you're talking about homicide deaths, crimes reported to law enforcement, or the victimization survey, they all show crime is really at or near record lows today. And finally, we don't have a victimization survey for California, so it's it's harder to say here. But generally, all the measures show the same thing, that crime is at or near record lows. So thank you
so
for your
much,
question.
Mike.
That's a great question.
Thank you, Mike. And then we have a lot. So thank you to Ben and Carolina for those questions that were sent in that way. We also had some that were emailed, and then we have a lot that have been sent in the chat. I'm actually going to turn it over to Gracia if there's a question that you want to pull out of this, just because my voice has been heard so much. I'd like to share that if you don't mind.
No, there was a great one that I'm going to go to because it kind of touches on what Mike was just talking about. So Mike, this is a question from sent in anonymously right now through the webinar. Is there any economic data challenging the false narrative that smash and grabs and business burglaries are the reason corporate businesses are closing stores?
Yes, they're on admission. When we were first, when shoplifting was first being raised as a major issue in San Francisco and also Oakland, retail stores like Walgreens in particular, Target, a few others, were saying they were either shutting down stores or moving out of the city or considering doing so because shoplifting was so terrible. Smash and grab, of course, again, the rates go up and down so radically. I mean, San Francisco can have 9,000 a year, or they can have 30,000 the next year, depending on who was operating in the city at the time. That is a very annoying theft, and it does a very annoying crime. And it's hard to know exactly what to do about it. But as far as the kinds of crimes we're talking about, when the San Francisco Chronicle investigated, and we did an investigation, we found that actually Walgreens was shutting down stores all over the country, not just San Francisco, because they had overbuilt in so many areas, and business was down. And they finally admitted it. I mean, there's press statements from Walgreens that they overstated the impact of shoplifting in order to, I'll put it in my words, to cover up bad corporate decisions. So yeah, that's pretty much a false narrative. To the extent stores are closing, they're closing around the country. They're not just closing in the Bay Area or in California. So that's a fairly easy one to counter because they've admitted that that's not the reason. Anyway, good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Another one we have is from Mr. Breckenridge. Sorry, I meant Breckenridge. And his question, or their question, is: do you think that people that these smash and grabs are scary? I think it's that people think that these smash and grabs are scary and high because of the use of Ring cameras and surveillance camera by media and platforms like Nextdoor and Citizen app.
Does somebody else want to look at that one, or?
I guess the way I'm understanding the question is the perception of these smash and grabs
Yeah.
seems very high now because we're like in a more surveillance state where there's cameras and recordings happening and they can be reposted on social media. That's the way I'm understanding the question, if that helps.
Absolutely. I mean, yes. Smash and grabs were much more common in the 1990s than today, and before the 1980s and 1990s. So, yeah, I mean, even these type of offenses that we're seeing featured in the news, like shoplifting, smash and grabs, and non-residential burglaries, business burglaries, uh, were much, much higher 40 years ago than they are today. But we have surveillance cameras. We have, and this is another funny thing to me. Uh, what media used to be obsessed with, and rightly so, was violent crime, the homicides, the robberies, the gang crimes, and so forth. It seems odd to me now that we're featuring shoplifting as a major crime. I can understand in a way, some of the property crimes, but shoplifting, uh, that's our major concern now. And it sort of indicates to me that the crime levels and the dangers of crime to society have dropped so much that we're now concentrating on lesser crimes. And yeah, definitely in a surveillance society where we have video, especially if we have a video that can be posted and I don't, they always have to go viral, then people are going to think that crime is worse now than it's ever been. And that's just not the case. It's actually better for the most part today than it's ever been.
Thank you, Mike. And then there's another question. I think I'm gonna have to share screen to go back. Maybe you can show us. It says, and because I think it's tied into one of the categories of crime, but the question is, what is the difference between motor vehicle theft now and in the 90s? And I think that was when we were sharing. So let me share screen and go back to the main one, or you don't have it on the larger one?
Well, it would be in all property crimes, but yeah, motor vehicle theft is a separate category, and it was also much higher in the 80s and 90s than it is today. Um, one of the things is cars are harder to steal. Cars and trucks are harder to steal today than they were back then. There's a lot more alarm systems and lock systems and so forth. But still, there are now, as there were then, organized rings that can do quite a bit of theft in certain cities. Right now, it's way down in San Francisco where it used to be high. It'll probably go up somewhere else. But motor vehicle theft, if you look at that top line on there, the aqua line, all property crime, motor vehicle theft is a big part of that. Not a huge part, but theft, as you can see, is the major part. Other kinds of theft besides motor vehicle, the blue line is the major part of property crime. But motor vehicle theft is way down like everything else. And we can't say that enough, that back in the days when we imprisoned a whole lot of people for drug and property offenses, crime rates were much worse than they are today. So prison obviously is not the solution.
Thank you, Mike. Let me, Nancy, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? You're helping us on the back end, but we didn't give you a chance. You want to say hi?
And for our intros, we had folks do their name and then a false narrative that they've maybe heard on crime. So thank you so much.
Of course, my name is Nancy Juarez. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a policy analyst with the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice. A false narrative I've heard a lot is using scare tactics or cherry pick media stories regarding crime, specifically in regards to young people, to start policing third spaces, whether that be malls or just enacting like curfews, that really those changes are coming from false narratives like that Mike has shared today and Grecia and Tina have uplifted. So thank you. I hope y'all have been enjoying the webinar so far.
Now, I add something very quickly. Crime by young people has dropped so precipitously in California. And not only that, crime, incarceration of young people in both local facilities, and of course, we shut DJJ. I used to have 10,000 people in DJJ back in the 1990s. So crime and incarceration have dropped so precipitously among young people that a teenager today is actually less likely to be arrested than a Californian in their 50s. And that's something that's absolutely unheard of. So a lot of the reason for California's huge crime drop has been the decline in crime among young people. It's declined among all ages, but especially young people. So this is another very encouraging thing because it suggests that the future that these young people are growing up in is going to be more crime-free. But anyway, that's not the public perception, which is why we're here today.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, I have another one for you. This one came in anonymously and it says crime trends are not as high as the 90s, but do you think that that drop might be a rebound of the high crime rates?
I'm not sure what the question is, but to the extent it's saying that maybe it's a reaction against the high crime rates of the 1990s, I think that might be true for violent crime. I think a generation grew up after the 1990s and said, we don't want to go the way of our parents and big brothers and sisters and so forth that were involved in a lot of violent crime in the 1990s and also property crime and drug crime. We've learned from that, and we're not going to commit as many crimes today. There seems to be some research evidence that younger generations today have kind of learned from the bad experiences of older generations. So there is some support for that. If that's what the question's asking, if not, set us straight on what's being asked, and we'll try to look at it.
I can go to a question. I'm going to go to some questions we got via email because we're answering almost all of them in the chat. And that is a question that we got in the email. It says, is the media doing the crime narrative because tech and biotech are not generating revenue and firing people? It's a hard one.
Does anybody else have a thought about that?
I will say that I have read that there are businesses that opened up a lot of stores and people are not shopping as much anymore. Prices are high. And so essentially they're bad business decisions and they're closing stores down and then saying that they're closing stores because of retail theft. And Little Hoover Commission just came out with a report and it still shows that the main reason for loss of inventory, which is shrinkage, that's how they count things are lost, is internal reasons. So there is a lot of that going on that I have seen. I don't know if that answers the question we got via email, but that's kind of how I understood it.
Exactly, and also that the public's perception of crime is driven by media coverage, and right now the public thinks shoplifting is through the roof because of lots and lots of media coverage and the viral videos and so forth. When it's not, it's actually lower for the most part than in past decades. So yeah, I think I don't remember this being the case, and memories can be flawed, but I don't remember that if you were a billionaire, your every thought got covered day after day in national media. Billionaires either tended to stay out of public issues more because it was in their business interest not to offend people. Now it just seems like if you have a lot of money, you're going to get your views into the press, right or wrong, on a constant basis. And if you want to talk. So yes, I think that perception is being driven by some people. The tech industry has been very vocal lately. So there may be something to that.
I'll take it for a sec, Chrissy, if that's okay.
I was responding to message in the chat. I'm also answering that way.
Yeah, we're trying to respond to folks in the chat so that I'm going to read some of these might not be questions, these might be comments, but they're definitely part of the conversation that we want to be heard. And while we might not have answers for all of these are the conversations that we want to be part of and encourage people to be having. So one of them says, the false narrative spread by it's by an anonymous attendee. Thank you. The false narrative spread by law enforcement, like the sheriff you showed, often is silent about how law enforcement has benefited a lot from AB 109, Prop 47, and other reform funding. Does anybody want to comment on that before we keep going? Otherwise, I'll just keep going. Another one says...
Yes. Well, no, I think that's a very good point. Law enforcement right now, correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who study this, gets the lion's share of a lot of the AB 109 funding, or a lot of the funding right now that's supposed to go to community programs. Law enforcement is getting, and my understanding is they'd like to get even more. And so this Riverside sheriff, who, by the way, is a very underperforming sheriff in terms of his efficiency in clearing crimes in Riverside County. Yeah, I think there's probably an organized effort to see if they can get even more of the money than they get now, despite the fact that spending on law enforcement per capita and in gross dollars is up. California is not defunding the police.
And to that
We
point,
have-
I just wanted to mention really quick, Tina, I answered a question of that kind of similar to that in the chat. We have another report on clearance rates, and Riverside is spending more per capita for their sheriff's department than the state average. It's really high, and you can see it on the clearance report that we have, and that one has a dashboard where you can see your own county and your own city and see how it's faring compared to the state.
That's what I was going to say. Thank you. So great. We have reports for a lot of the things that we're talking about. So really proud of that and encourage you all. One of our last slides will encourage you to look at our reports. I'm going to keep reading these in the interest of time. This one says, this is from Jesse Cipher. I'm just going to assume if your name is on here that I can read it. You may have touched on this already, but it's difficult to combat bad narratives when politicians are saying that regardless of whether crime is down, people feel unsafe, and that's the most important thing. How can we combat this? That is a webinar within itself, right? And really what we're trying to do with this information, I will take a stab at that part, is to empower folks to, all we can do is use the data. If we can't argue based on feelings when we're trying to go based off of maybe facts or numbers or reporting. That does not at all discount anyone's feelings around feeling unsafe. And maybe those are separate conversations that might need to have about what is it that really makes us feel safe? Is it access to resources? Is it certain things in our own communities? Is it more police? Those are other types of questions, and something that we also think about as well. So I don't think we can really answer that aside from hoping to inform folks and then encourage them to have these types of conversations. Maybe trying to combat false narratives and engage in truth-telling things with people that they know. Another one from Kate McCracken says,
Wait.
no question.
Can I
Go
add something, Tina? Just really quick. I really love that question because I think that's what we're combating, right? There's like the actual statistics that show us reported crime, that can show us clearance rates and all these other things and how many people are in jail. But that feeling of what people feel, I think goes also back to the narrative. And I think it's really important to hold a lot of these people that are spreading these narratives, hold them accountable, right? Because that does impact how we feel in our day-to-day life. And it may impact how I maybe don't want to visit that city because all I've heard are horrible things about it. And that is very different than the reality of people in the cities. So again, but it kind of also goes back to these have real life impacts, because we can say numbers all we want, but the media, what we're seeing on social media, those smash and grab videos grab a lot of attention. They make you feel a type of way, and then they give you this idea. So yes, the feeling of safety versus like what we're seeing in day to day is very different, and it's important to distinguish the two. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. And then Kate McCracken, no question, just wanted to thank Mike Males for his decades of experience and research that continue to provide quality information and challenge the dominant narrative. I had to read that, Mike. I echo that as well. Thank you. I followed CJCJ and printed their reports long before I worked for them, so I feel the same way.
Kate was a part of CJ. Yeah, she's participated in this, so she also deserves some congratulations in that area.
So we're not going to be able to answer the rest of them, but I will add just another conversation one by James Walsh. Is there an organized effort to combat the movement to reform the reforms? Is the Prosecutors Alliance effective in supporting progressive DAs and fighting Prop 36? And then there's a link for the Prosecutors Alliance .org. So, and then there's things that are very technical about the adoption, which we did talk about the statistics of like that there's maybe if you want to reiterate that, Mike, as we close this out, that there is a new reporting system that might make things look a certain way. And then I'm gonna close this and then we can go on to the slides after Mike answers that.
the FBI's new National Incident-Based Reporting includes lesser crimes within each offense that were not previously included. So, if you commit a robbery and then also commit, steal something from a vehicle on the way down the street, both those crimes are going to be reported now. Whereas before, only the most serious crime would have been reported under the FBI's old system. So, yeah, crime can appear to go up because we changed our system. And we've especially done that for crimes like rape, where we drastically, and I think with good, it's good policy, but it drastically expanded the definition of rape. And so it appears there's more rape, but there's not. They just expanded the definition. And generally good reform. Same thing with domestic violence. When we started policing domestic violence more, it looked like assault was going up. Very good reform. It was something that needed to be policed, but it made the statistics look like they were going up. So it's always good to be mindful when changes in the system and systemic and statistical techniques are going to make it look like crime is going in a certain direction.
Thank you, Mike. We're seeing like a lot of questions near the end. So what we're going to do, we're hoping to have these webinars again, y'all, and engage in these types of conversations in the future. We really appreciate the questions and the thought put into them. And we hope to engage your interest in future conversations as well. Do you mind going over to the next slide, Gracia? It's a little busy, y'all. But we want to let you know how you can maybe get involved or how to engage with this further. You'll see on here, I went ahead and just pulled a few things on our website. You can look up your local crime data, your local clearance rates. You can like check on your local stuff. You can also download some resource sheets that we've made about the truth about crime in California from previous reports, like taking some false narratives and then putting the truth out there. You can explore law enforcement budgets with their clearance data. You can share our research with folks. And then if you have additional questions from that, you can come back to us and we'll do our best to answer them. We might not be able to answer them all, but that's something you can do as well. Also really want to encourage you all to get involved with your state and local coalitions if you're not already a part of them. We have a few of our partners on here. And these are folks like the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, All of Us or None, as well as Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, and CJCJ, the California Alliance for Youth and Community Justice. These are just a few places that you can get tapped in at a statewide level and then immediately find out how to get connected at a local level. If you want to engage in this information, if you want to take what you're finding here and put it out at a local level, or just get connected to other folks. So we definitely wanted to share that with you all. And let me make sure there's not something else in here that we need to answer right now. No. Can you go to the last slide? I think we might actually end up, if we want to answer, I'll open it for closing comments if people want to share them. And I will just reiterate that the intention of this was for you all to be able to see what some of those false headlines might be and then get a really clear view of what the California crime is looking like. And we hope that if you walk away from something, you walk away with that crime is actually down, and any type of increase that is being seen. Well, that sounds a little dramatic. The increase that is being seen is also to somewhat be expected with COVID, with things reopening and things like that. Mike, do you want to give like a takeaway summary? We've got a few minutes. And then if not, I'll leave it for closing words for anyone else and then just thank folks for joining us.
Well, just very briefly, 20 years ago, we had 250,000 Californians in prisons and jails behind bars. That's both youth and adults. Today, we have about 140,000. That's still very high by Western standards, but it is down over 100,000 due mainly to reforms. The crime trends are overall very encouraging, and they have not gone up for the most part. In fact, they haven't gone up at all during the justice reform period. So I think this is something we can proudly defend from a factual standpoint. Whether or not we convince politicians and the public, that's just all we can do is present the information, and that's what we're trying to do here today. So thank all of you for being here. So if does anyone else have anything to say?
I don't think so. We opted to, in the interest of time, not tackle some of these other questions that we do have on a document. And as we continue having these webinars, we definitely appreciate the questions. And if you have any that you really feel like you need it and it would apply to your local area, to your own work, to things like that, please feel free to email us, contact us on social media, via our website. A lot of times people do that, and we do our best to answer those questions as well. One that came up a few times that we are not going to answer right now, but it came up on our social media and I see it on here, so I don't want you to think we didn't hear you, is someone said, what about the recalls in the Bay Area and those who support it? We don't really have time to answer all those questions, but I don't want you to think that we were ignoring you. And then we had some about like the number of agencies, California agencies that reported to the new system. Other than that, we thank you so much for your time. We hope that you found this information helpful, and that when you engage with our work, if you have any other questions, you come back to us and we'll answer them as best that you can. And we hope that that you join us in trying to challenge these narratives when you see them, when you hear them. We're not asking everyone to go out like, looking for a fight, but these are conversations we can have with maybe our family members, maybe people that we know. There are times that these conversations are around us in ways that are safe to engage with, and really to remember the danger behind these narratives, and that what we do not want is to fill those prisons again and have that overcrowding. And we want for people not to be dying in there, and for those resources to be out in the community following folks that might need rehabilitation that way. So with that, we want to thank you all so much for your time. And we're actually going to probably shut off a few minutes early. Thank you so much. This recording will also go out to those who attended, and please be on the lookout for our next one. And we will also be having part 2 of this series coming out within the next few weeks as well, looking specifically at crime in California. So thank you, everyone. We hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Bye.